Hey friends, thank you for taking time out of your week to watch this special message today. I'm Pastor Daniel, and I want you to know I look forward to meeting you one day in person. If we were a blessing to you, let us know. You can comment, you can like, you can interact with other people watching online. It sure is fun for us to see you developing community online. Hey, lean in, get that pencil out, because I believe the Holy Spirit's got something special for you today. Thank you very much.
The title of today's message is The Devil in Disguise. The Devil in Disguise. Several years ago, I think it was 2019 to be exact, I wrote a book called The Monster is in Me, The Monster is Me. And the main idea of this book is centered around learning how to resist the enemy so that we can rewrite our identity. And in order to resist the enemy, we have to recognize who he is and recognize how he works, or we'll spend our entire life resisting the wrong things. And really, I wrote this book to a younger self that I would have loved for somebody to hand me this book. So if you have a teenager, a young adult, I really think this book would be helpful to them. And the reason why is because many of us have been resisting a person our entire life when the person isn't the real problem. There's some of us in here today who've been resisting change. But change is where growth takes place. There are some of us in here today who resist uncomfortable situations, but uncomfortable situations is where God shows up and shows off his awesome power. There are 34 miracles recorded in the first few books of the New Testament, not counting the big three like the virgin birth, the resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus Christ. And with each miracle, he is asserting his authority over everything. In fact, the meta-narrative of the Gospels is the progressive revelation of his authority over all things. For instance, he asserts his authority over sin by forgiving it. He asserts his authority over sickness by healing it. He asserts his authority over powers and principalities by casting them out. And he asserts his authority over the winds and the waves by commanding them to be still. Jesus will let you run out of wine at a wedding so he can show his authority over the molecular structure in biology. He'll tell you to cast a net on the right side of the boat after you have fished all night and caught nothing, just to prove his authority over zoology. He'll tell you to take a boat ride to the region of the Gerasenes just to find a man named Legion and command a few thousand demons to come out of, to prove his authority over demonic and evil. He'll command a man who's been dead for 4 days to walk out of a tomb just to prove his authority over time and space and life and death. He'll put mud on a man's eyes to fix his sight, to show his authority over the neuroanatomy. He'll tell a lame man to pick up his mat and walk, and to multiply 5 loaves and 2 fish just to show his authority over quantum mechanics. He'll heal a man in absentia just to show his authority over latitude and longitude. And I'm saying all this to tell you all of his workings can be a little bit confusing. There are 967 names given for God in the Bible. But as far as I know, there are no middle names given to him. And I think that if God had a middle name, it would be confusing. Oh, y'all ain't gonna talk to me today. Wouldn't you agree that walking with God can be a little confusing? I mean, forgiving your enemy when you'd rather punch them in the nose and get revenge can be a little bit confusing. Being told to give the first 10% of your income to the Lord and believing that God will bless the rest can be confusing. Being encouraged to raise your hand and worship someone that you cannot see can be a little confusing. Following God can be a little confusing, and the enemy takes advantage of this. You see, the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty. Now, yes, God is certain, but the way that he works is not, it's confusing. In fact, it's Peter who said this: be alert and of sober mind, for your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking or seeking for someone to devour. Now, I've always been a little confused by this, because the text that we just read says the devil is a roaring lion, but I was raised in church, and I would also hear the pastor say in Revelation chapter 5 that Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So as a little kid trying to figure this out, wait a minute, you're telling me that Satan and the Savior are both a lion? Well, that's a little confusing. In fact, it wasn't until a few years ago when I began to read this verse and study this verse for myself that I saw something I had never seen before. It does not say that the devil is a lion. It says he is like a lion. You see, he's not a lion. He just prowls and is loud like a lion. He's not a lion. He is a liar. The devil is in disguise. He's a poser. And the place that he devours the most is our mind. And that's why Peter says, be of sober mind. You see, the thoughts that I think, the anxieties that attack, the bitterness that builds, the guilt that grows, the insecurities that embed, put roots down in valuable mental space. And Peter says, we cannot be ignorant of the devil's devices. This week, I did a quick Google search when I was studying, and I typed in the word device. Do you know what it is that came up? Your phone. More specifically, it was an Android phone that came up. But do you ever wonder why Twitter feeds or Instagram feeds or Facebook feeds are called feeds? It's because they're feeding your mind. And if we are not careful, the feeds on our phone end up feeding on our mind. They cause comparison, which kills joy. They cause worry, which kills peace. And they cause insecurity, which kills our identity. So Peter says you have to know who the enemy is, recognize how he works so you can resist him. In other words, don't spend the rest of your life as a born-again believer, but living as a prisoner to the old person. And last week, I introduced you to a concept called the life lie. It is the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And Moses is a classic case study. He told himself a life lie so that he could avoid taking responsibility for his life. Now, the Bible tells us that Moses knew God face to face as no other man had known him, yet he still struggles with his insecurities. And his insecurities created a false identity, which ended up creating a false reality. And Moses lived in the transition from who he was to who God was calling him to become. And transitions, as you know, often create more questions than answers. And questions create insecurity, and insecurity creates tension, and tension creates anger. And Moses shows us that insecurity and that tension or that frustration, if they're not controlled and conquered, can end up costing you dearly. Now, in a moment of honesty, in a moment of vulnerability and transparency, I have to tell you that I have a very, very hard time with the passage that we are about to read. And the reason why is I've been a leader most of my entire life. I understand Moses' frustrations, but I do not understand the punishment that God gives as a result of it. Now, last week we read Numbers 13 and 14. Today we're going to read Numbers chapter 20. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. There, Miriam, it is an important part. It's Moses' sister, an important part of the story that we won't get into today, but she died and was buried. Now, there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had died when our brothers fell asleep before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness that we and our livestock should die here? Now, you're going to see a theme that comes up week after week. Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It is no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates. Now, let's not forget, that's a lie, because last week we were told that it took 2 men to carry the grapes. They were so big out of the promised land. And there's no water to drink. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Let me stop right now and acknowledge this, that God will always show up when we admit that we are powerless on our own. When we get to the place where we say, I've tried everything and I've done everything I know to do, but these people are driving me crazy. So here I am, Lord, in your presence, on my face, seeking answers. If you do that, God will always show up. So verse 7. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff. Everyone say staff. This is important, Moses. This is the same staff that you raised over and split the Red Sea. This is the same staff that you threw on the ground and it turned into a snake. This is the same staff that turned the Nile into blood until your enemy released you from bondage. This is the same staff that was raised over the Amalekites until they knew they were no match for the Israelites. This is the same staff, Moses, that has already brought water from a rock once before. Take that staff, you and your brother Aaron, and gather the assembly together and speak. Everyone say speak. Speak to that rock before their eyes and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they live and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he commanded him. And he and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels. Must we bring you water out of this rock?" I love Moses. I love Moses because there were so many times in his story where he went into the presence of the Lord and prayed on behalf of these same people. After God had repented in his heart and said, "I'm going to destroy this people, start over, wipe them off the face of the earth," Moses goes in before God. He begs God for forgiveness, and God relinquishes from killing from them. But this time, he had enough. So this time he goes into the presence of the Lord or in front of the people and he says, "Listen, you rebels, I've led you through the wilderness for 38 years without even your sandals wearing out. I prayed for protein and God sent a quail storm. I prayed for a meal and God sent you an all-you-can-eat buffet of manna. I held up my staff and the sea parted, and now you're coming to me about water? Will it ever be enough?" All right. Have you ever wanted to yell, "Will it ever be enough?" To your kids? To your boss? Kids, to your parents or a teacher? Okay, let's do this together. You think we should just do it together? On the count of three, everybody's going to yell out, "Will it ever be enough?" Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. Will it ever be enough? Doesn't that feel good? I know it's so good. I have a confession to make. I yelled this one time on vacation. At the happiest place on earth, I got so mad, I went goofy and I almost punched Mickey. I'm just gonna be honest with you guys right now, it is not the happiest place on earth, it is hell on earth. You can't even get into Main Street without your entire family. You got kids licking rails, trying to bring COVID and Hep C home to the entire family. Families out there fighting with swords, kids complaining, mama's crying, and dad's mad. I took a picture when I took my kids to Disneyland, so as they are commiserating, I am commemorating this moment. Here's a picture of Eva. I don't know why Amy's like, "Dad, Daniel's done lost it." She thinks it's funny. Here's a picture of Noah. Yeah. And I gotta tell you guys, I have been such a good dad. I sold the kidney to get my kids Mickey Mouse ears, sold a lung just to buy them a churro for lunch. Y'all, I even acted like I enjoyed grown men dressed in costumes hugging me. Smiled at Tinkerbell and high-fived two weirdos riding down Main Street singing on a tandem bike. I even stood in line to ride It's a Small World twice. I was a good dad. Stayed and watched the parade. My goodness, and they were still complaining. So there I was, standing somewhere between Fantasyland and never, ever, ever coming back here Tomorrowland. Having a full-blown grown man childish meltdown. So I stood in front of my kids and the whole community at Disneyland and said, "Listen, you rebels, will it ever be enough?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck. Everyone say struck. The rock twice with the staff, and water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. On the surface, what Moses did worked. But just because it works on the surface does not mean that it's going to have a sustainable effect. You can only control your people with your anger or your emotional outbursts and manipulation for so long. Because even though water came out of the rock, what came out of Moses' heart prevented him from entering the promised land. And it's so sad because the people got what they wanted, but it cost Moses everything that God had promised. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I have given them. The question I want to ask is, what got Moses to this place? After you so faithfully lead this people and you pray on behalf of these people, you're being used as a deliverer, what got him to this place? I want you to write this word down. Number one, deficit. We've already been told there was no water for the community and the people gathered. I did a little interesting word study this week when I was studying for this message and figured out that the Hebrew word for gathered actually means a place where people come together for the purpose of complaint. Y'all didn't know Facebook was in the Bible, did you? This is the original water cooler conversation. And they're fighting because they don't have water, which for them represents security. And Moses fights back because it's revealing his biggest fear, and for him it was his lack of self-worth. And the enemy always attacks our security and our sense of self-worth, and Meribah represents both. Now, yes, it was a matter of life and death, but it was also a matter of meaning. And when we have a deficit in one of these two areas, we end up getting distressed. And when we get distressed, we start doing things we wouldn't normally do. We get edgy, we get irritable, and we lash out at the people that we love. You guys do understand that anger is never really about the people. It's revealing a deficit somewhere, whether that's an unmet expectation or an unmet need. And when you and I take our kids to Disneyland, it's a sacrifice financially. And we want our kids to have fun, so what happens is we want them to have so much fun, we don't end up eating food because we want to give them a churro, Mickey Mouse ears, and a sword. We want them to have memories, but what you and I are really in need of is a meal. So it's not about standing in line as much as it is our standing as a man. Because when we look around, everyone else is able to give their kids what we can't give our kids. And then our wife looks and says, you can't buy that for them because we can't afford that. Or when your kids ask for another ice cream and we don't have the money, we end up lashing out. And all of a sudden we end up at Flicks Flyers just letting some stuff fly because it's been building up. So instead of speaking calmly to the rock, we end up striking it in anger. But what's so tragic about this is they're at the precipice of the promised land. They're on the very edge of entering, and in a time they should have been conquering new territory, the enemy has them quarreling over old problems. Now, this is not the first time they needed water. God has already done this miracle once before in Exodus chapter 17. But isn't that how the enemy works? He brings up old issues that attack our security and our sense of self-worth so we can't move forward. But I need to tell you today, the closer that you get to Canaan, the more conflict and chaos he's going to create. And I think one of the reasons why the church is so divided today is because the devil has got us so distracted. The devil knows that if we ever get together, unified, and focused on the Great Commission and the mission of seeing people saved, then we would be dangerous. So he keeps throwing up old things for us to fight about. We fight about translations of the Bible, what we're going to wear to worship or how we worship, how loud the music is, little nuances of the Spirit or how the preacher preaches. But we are not supposed to come to church and congregate so that we can complain. We congregate so we can celebrate God's grace and his goodness and get a glimpse of his divine glory. We come to church so that we can be equipped to scatter and to conquer new territory. So listen to me, church. We can't gather and come to church at Meribah so that we quarrel. We come to conquer. We know that Canaan is up ahead. So I don't care who you are, black, white, rich, poor, Democrat, Republican, Catholic, Charismatic, Pentecostal, Presbyterian. I need you to fight with me. I need you to stand with me because we have an enemy that is real, an enemy that is out there. And we've got to get together, not to fight about old problems, but stand together so that we conquer new territories. Because if we don't have each other, we end up all alone. And when we are left alone with a deficit, write this word down, disappointment sets in. Man, they lacked and they went whacked, y'all. I want you to look at how they talked to Moses. You brought us into the wilderness to die. You brought us out of Egypt to this terrible place. Really? Terrible place? We had figs and grapes and pomegranates and grain in Egypt. Yeah, but you also had whips and chains because you were in slavery, making bricks without straw. You see, when people get disappointed, they begin to glamorize a past that didn't even exist. I like when people say to me, Pastor, why do we need all this fancy technology? Why do we need all this fancy equipment? Can't we just, get back to the simple church like the one they had in the New Testament? I said, really? Simple. Have you ever read any of Paul's 13 letters to the church where they were getting turned up at communion? Where they had prostitutes involved in worship? Where they were sleeping with family members, y'all, and their new believer ownership class was the only way you could get to heaven is through circumcision. Any of y'all want to come to that class? It's simple. Y'all ain't been reading the 13 books that Paul wrote that I've been reading because there was anything but simple. But when we run out of a resource, we look for someone else to take responsibility. So they began to point the finger at Moses and Aaron. And apparently this hit a button with Moses. And I gotta tell you something. Everybody has a button. For the first few years of marriage, I didn't think Miss Amy had a button. Oh, but I promise you, 25 years later, oh sweet, sanctified, spirit-led Miss Amy has a button. There's a little bit of devil in those angel eyes, and I have the divine gift of bringing it to the surface. Everybody has something that if you hit that button just right, it will completely change their Enneagram number, and they will go from a 9 to an 8 in a New York minute. Because the Bible tells us that Moses was the meekest man who ever lived other than Jesus. But he violently strikes the rock when God was trying to show his people grace. And apparently, he wanted God to be upset with the people the way he was upset with people, but God didn't get upset. So he gets disappointed. And here's the thing. If you've ever led people, if you've ever managed people, if you've ever been a teacher, if you've ever been a coach, if you've ever had children, if you've ever been a part of the Communist Party, the HOA, you understand disappointment. Because Moses is tired. Every decision that he makes is questioned. He's like, after all the times I defended you, after all the times I encouraged you, after all the hard work and the sacrifice, the dedication to serve you, you going to roll up on me and disrespect me and embarrass me and spread a bad report about me? Oh, brothers and sisters and church people, I get his disappointment. But as we dig a little deeper, I don't think Moses was really disappointed with the people. I think he was still dealing with the insecurity that he had carried with him since he met God at the burning bush several years earlier. It was the life lie that he would simply never be good enough to lead these people. So when Moses met God at the burning bush and God said, you'd be my deliverer, he comes up with all these different excuses. Some people say as many as 6 different excuses. And here's what he says in Exodus chapter 4, verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, oh my Lord, I'm not eloquent. I'm slow of speech and tongue. I stutter, God. What's interesting, if you've ever read this conversation, is he never once says that God can't do it. He knows God can do it. He just doesn't think that God could use him to do it. And it doesn't matter who you are in here today, all of us are trying to escape the prison of insecurity. And the primary voice that goes through our mind when God is calling us or challenging us to do something different is this: I am not blank enough. And that blank changes at every age and every phase. It's the essence of insecurity, and our insecurities always drive our activities, because that's why Moses ended up in the wilderness to begin with in a shepherd's staff. He was fleeing his past. So when God meets him at the bush, Moses says, pick somebody more capable, somebody that doesn't struggle the way that I struggle, So not only is Moses dealing with this frustration in this moment, but he's also dealing with 40 years of insecurity and fear. So maybe he's not really disappointed in them, he's disappointed in himself. Because in a way, they were right. He should have led them into Canaan some 40 years earlier, but he wasn't able to. And I've come to realize over the years that my core fear and the reason why I withdraw and the reason why I lash out is not because of what other people say, but because of what I tell myself. And somewhere in life, I developed an insecurity, began to operate out of this deficit that I will never be good enough. So my first instinct when somebody begins to question me or to begin to criticize me is to fight for my sense of self-worth. And it's a deficit. And that deficit leads to disappointment because I don't want to disappoint the God that I love or the people that I lead. So I end up putting on myself the pressure of endless expectations. So I walk around as a combustional component just waiting for somebody to ask me for something that I really don't know the answer to, or every time my phone rings or every time my email chirps alert, I just want to shout, will it ever be enough? What do you want from me? And it's not the devil in my device, it's my deep-rooted insecurities. It's my lifeline. And many of us function in this place. Our fear of letting people down causes us to withdraw or to lash out so that we protect ourselves from disappointing other people once again. And here's the third thing I want you to write down. Dependence. You see, at first glance, it's hard to understand why God told him to take the staff if he didn't want him using it. Then I remembered what Moses had said to God when God called him. I'm not good at speaking. So God actually gave him a staff as a form of comfort. And he used that staff to do some powerful things. We've already talked about them. But over time, he became dependent upon the staff. The staff came to represent the source of Moses' strength. But to enter into this new territory, God needed somebody that wasn't dependent upon the staff for strength, but upon him for strength. This is a test of trust in the transition. Can you hold the staff in your hand but have the faith not to use it? Can you speak, which is harder, rather than strike, which has become easier for you? So what looks like an act of anger is really an issue of faith. He could use a staff, but only God could help him speak because, again, he stuttered. So maybe it wasn't pride, but insecurity that caused him to strike. Because anytime you allow insecurity to build and you never believe who you are in Christ, it will limit your participation in the promises of God because you're focusing upon self, not on what he can do through you. And God's saying, it's never been about you. It's never been about your staff. It's never been about your mouth. It's always been about my mighty hand. So before Moses could enter into this new land, he needed to know, you didn't need the staff. I've always been your source of strength. And that same test is in front of all of us today. Will you strike or will you speak? Will you override these insecurities or will you believe that you have a new identity? Who is the source of your strength? If I could go back 30 years and speak to a 15-year-old Daniel, I would tell him, deal with the devil of insecurity now, or you'll be dealing with it your entire life. So if you're here today and you're continually finding yourself getting more frustrated or more angry or more irritable, ask yourself why. And you're gonna say, because I'm tired. Sure, you're tired. We're all tired. But what's the real reason? What are you really afraid of? What have you been telling yourself about yourself? That's a lie. I love God's response to Moses when he says, what's your name? And God gives the name he loves to call himself. I am who I am. And the reason why I love that is you can put 967 names on God, but the name that God gives himself is open-ended. And the reason why it's open-ended is I am whatever you need me to be when you need me to be it. I am strong when you're weak. I'm capable when you don't feel like you can. And in him, we are too. Because greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. And I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. You see, this false humility, this insecurity that we carry around as children of God, it doesn't help anybody. It's called confidence. I can't, but he can. And he is in me. So if he's called me, he's equipped me. And he'll give me everything that I need when he's asking me to do it. So what is the source of your strength? If you think it's yourself, well, that's eventually going to wear out. You're going to need something greater than yourself. And that's what the Holy Spirit, why he lives within us to give us that life of victory and empower us to do things we can't do on our own.
Hey, wasn't that a wonderful message today? I told you the Holy Spirit had something in store for you. I want to say thank you to all those who are given to our church. You are certainly a blessing, not only to me and my family, but to the entire Mountain View family. Thank you again for investing in Mountain View Church.